Alright, we are back. We're gonna make a Legion TD2 Mercenary checklist, or checklist, Jesus, tier list. um, there are some missing in here, but this is honestly the only one that I found. So we're just gonna go based off these units. There's, like I said, a couple missing, but, you know, let me know what you guys think, where you guys would place some of these. This is just based off my experience as far as who I think is difficult to deal with, as far as who is most consistent. And again, against the right comps and builds and everything, all these units can be essentially a S tier send or a D tier send. But I'm just going for overall consistent and best. So we'll just start in their order. Brute. Oof! S tier start, baby. I mean, Jesus. Yes, he gives a little bit less income than the Fiend as far as for the 60 Mythium, but a very easy mercenary to send as far as overall Mythium needed at 60. And especially early game, he can really just make you leak. Honestly, even late game, he's okay, but for only 60 Mythium, I would say he's the best value for 60. Now again, a little bit less value than Fiend as far as the income you're going to get, but honestly, you'll make that income essentially when you make them leak and possibly even do king damage, especially early game. But yeah, the fact that he hits people and slows them down can be very disruptive to a team. Cannon. I'll put Cannon in B. I think she's solid. Again, definitely can win some fights for you. And a decent, you know, if you're trying to send backline, at least 100 isn't too insane in comparison to, you know, 120 is not too crazy either, but, you know, it goes Lizard at 40, which maybe you don't want to send him or multiple of him. So then you send Cannon next at 100. Now you can say Hermit is backline, but his purpose isn't to do damage, his purpose is to heal. But overall solid. Can definitely do some decent damage for sure. Now Centaur. Now this new Centaur, this is late March right now. The new Centaur that they just came out in this patch is honestly insane. I have to put him in A. He is super expensive Mythium wise, but the new one currently right now will literally shred through any team, and he has a whole lot of health, and obviously attacks multiple units at once. Very solid. Honestly, you know, the more expensive you get, probably the higher you're going to be overall. But overall, very solid send, especially to grouped up units. And especially if you can have a certain split as well, he'll do very, very solid damage. Dino, I just have to put in B. I think he's just overall solid, lower cost tank. You know, if you just need somebody to kind of, you know, eat up some time or whatever, he's your guy. He's not super expensive, only at 80 Mythium. But a lot of these other people, like tank-wise, okay, maybe Brute, but his purpose isn't to really tank. Fiend, not really a tank. Dino has a solid, very, very solid amount of health. He's not going to do crazy damage, but honestly does decent DPS. But then your next big tank is Ram, and then Kraken. So, you know, spam these boys for some tanks if you need it. Again, solid, but a little, not necessarily inconsistent, but he's not going to make them leak. He's the reason why the wave is leaking, if that makes sense. He's going to cause the wave to leak your guy, he's not going to cause it. Again, if that makes sense. Turtle, I think everybody's going to be about right here. I don't think anybody is necessarily a bad send at all. Turtle, I have to put B. I would just say the only benefit of why he's in B and not lower is just because he's magic damage. And obviously magic damage is good against the best defense in the game, which is Arcane. So not so good against everything else. But for only 40, and you're sending twos running, you know, a lot of Arcane, or maybe his carry's Arcane, then, you know, send a couple of those. Because the next magic person is Drake at 120. So being able to, well, I take that back. The next magic person is actually 100 with which is imps, but imps are not in this. But yeah, so, and imps give you less money than what's his face, than cannon. I appreciate the follow, Fallen Angel. Running through a quick tier list real quick. We're making a bunch today. Drake's, I would have to say, is A. I think having a backline magic damage unit can really harm some builds. And honestly, being 120 isn't a crazy amount. I mean, you could get 3 lizards out for one of them. But, again, depending on the builds and everything, depends upon what you want to send. But again, magic damage is arguably the best in the game at killing, you know, those units. Fiend, I think I honestly have to put Fiend on here. I mean, I don't feel like there's any super important point in any game to where I have gone, okay, let me do a Fiend instead of a Brute. I just don't think they're super great. I think, again, as I'll probably say way too many times, it all depends on who you're sending to. But I don't think it's ever like where I'm sweating or thinking about getting a Fiend out. 4 Eyes, at least A. Honestly, I think I have to keep him. No, I think I have to put him at S. I think it's just too good as far as damage dealt for a backline send. And again, magic damage huge. They are expensive at 240, but you know, solid. It's gonna do more damage than the witch, and obviously more damage than any of these other backlines. And honestly has a shit ton of health. So unless you're running like a serpent strat or something to kill the 4 Eyes, or you have like an elemental to splash over and do some damage to him, he's gonna help rip through your team very quick. Ghost Knight, honestly, I think Ghost Knight just isn't sent enough from me or from anyone else. I haven't really seen any Ghost Knights sent to me, maybe like 2 ever, and I probably have only sent like less than 5 ever. It's just, you know, like, are you going to send a Ghost Knight, or are you going to send an Ogre? You're just going to go Ogre, you know. It's kind of like the Fiend Brute situation. I think the Ghost Knight is actually really good, but I think it's just not used enough, so I can't really put him any higher. Hermit, S tier for sure. The fact that it's healing essentially everybody on your team, or on your send, on your wave, is insane. Can easily the best backline unit as far as helpfulness. And I'd say, you know, again, 4 Eyes is probably the most damage, but you know, Hermit is going to keep your wave and your sends alive very significantly. He does okay damage for, you know, being a healing unit, but for only 80 Mythium, it's easily the best, probably the best overall mercenary if I had to put him in order. Kraken, I don't know. So you would think that 400 Mythium and being the most expensive mercenary that he's S, but I don't know. I mean, it is a boss and can be. I think I just have to go A, and I don't really want to put him at S just because he is the most expensive. I don't think he's a super great carry as far as Mercenary Scent. Thank you for the follow, Raw Gaming. We're just running through some tier lists real quick, making a quickie. But the health is insane. I think depending on the wave that you send him, he can definitely withstand a lot, and he does pretty good damage, obviously, for being the most expensive mercenary. But I would honestly send just a bunch of other units probably before I would send him. I never really think to, if I was sitting just at 400 Mythium, do you want to send one Kraken or do you want to send like a bunch of units that can probably do better and or buff your team more than just being a massive tank? And maybe you need that. Maybe that's what you need to send exactly, but it is what it is. Lizard, not really the best, but again, he's the only backline send from, 40 to 100. Again, I don't really consider Hermit a backline send as far as DPS, but Lizard is alright. I think he can get the job done, especially depending on what, your send is running with, but I don't really think that he's the best. Solid early game, again, depending on the wave and whatnot, but nothing crazy. Mimic, I have to put Mimic at A. I think Mimic is honestly probably the most destructive. As long as it's not being targeted, that thing can eat alive your build. And it has a pretty significant amount of health for being a 160 send, which is in the very, middle of all the sends, but man, that thing can do some massive damage, Like if I just need a solid damaging unit send and I have enough, or if I'm just sending a bunch of units, not necessarily a bunch of mimics, but a bunch of different types of units and whatnot, Mimic can really, really mess you up. That thing does some scary amount of damage. Ogre, I think, is a solid 200 Mythium Send for sure. The biggest problem with him, and probably a lot of these mercenaries, is dependent upon when they get targeted. But he can dish out some heavy damage and has a really significant amount of health as well. And again, for the 200 Mythium, are you going to send an Ogre or a Ghost Knight? You're going to go Ogre 99% of the time. So he's really solid. I would definitely, send as many as you can. Pack Leader, gotta put him at A. I think the area effect of boosting damage for the entire wave, as well as, everybody that you also sent, is insane. And again, solid amount of health, does okay amount of damage, but an entire wave being attack boosted is very, very solid for only 160 Mythium. Safety Mole, probably have to go. Man, I kind of want to put him in S. I think I have to. I think, essentially damage shield or damage neglected and whatnot for your whole wave and anybody that you sent with him is insane. He honestly does a pretty significant amount of damage for only 120. And he also has a pretty good amount of health too for 120. And especially on certain waves, that man can one-man wrecking machine for sure. Shaman, A tier for sure. Decent amount of damage, solid amount of damage for, a 320 Mythium send, but the fact that he gets, I believe it's just attack speed boost. Or maybe it's damage dealt. I might be mixing up these two. But overall, very solid. That's, you know, a huge buff to some units. I don't really want to put him in S because I think he can be... the problem with a lot of the backline units is that if they are running Serpent or something that, you know, Violet where it electrifies multiple units, or Elementals where it can bounce, a lot of these backline units can actually be taken out, not necessarily quickly or well, but it can definitely disrupt your wave and your send. But honestly, Shaman has a ton of health for being a backline unit, and can really beef up your team. The Ram, I think I just have to put it in B. It's literally just something, I don't think it does enough damage for being such a high Mythium send. But again, you know, as far as if you just need literally something to tank damage and sit there and let the wave destroy the build, then Ram is your way to go. It's literally just going to sit there with its million health. It'll do enough damage for how much it costs, but its literally sole purpose is basically just to tank, much like the Kraken, but Kraken's going to do more damage than that will, and tank more obviously because it's just better. We'll leave Snail for last. Witch, I think Witch has to be A. 200 Mythium, spawns units, does decent damage, but the fact that it spawns units that does more damage and can just sit there and keep doing it on certain waves, if they're not being touched or dealt with, they can literally spawn an insane amount. You know, I'm sure we've all been there where we're on wave 21 and they send, you know, 3 or more witches, and the number just goes up because you're not killing the wave fast enough, and they're just spawning more and more units for you to have to kill. Now, as far as how much health they have and damage, a little lackluster, but they make up for it with, you know, they can do an insane amount depending on how many Frogos they spawn. Now, Snail, the lowest cost send in the game at 20, the earliest one, the first one, I think is just a solid B. Especially early game, you know, you send it on 1 and they're trying to be cheeky, that can make somebody leak. You send you know, 2 of them early on like wave 2, 3, 4 or something, honestly can make some people leak depending on the build. But, you know, only being 20 Mythium, it can't be insane. I think giant snails are even more annoying if you have that king spell, but even those aren't insane. It's just a lot of free cheeky people. Now some people are probably going to be hating on my Fiend, and honestly I like the Fiend. I liked it when I very first started playing, but then, you know, you find the Brute is also 60 Mythium, and yes, it's a little bit less income, but worth it. So I'll be nice and I'll put Fiend above B, because you know, with the right builds and the right sins, Fiend is not bad either. But let me know what you guys think, who you guys would move around, and honestly, like I said, depending on who you're sending to and whatnot, some of these units can be S tier or just bottom tier. So pay attention to who you're sending to, what they have built, and that can be a huge difference as to what you send. And we are, like I said, missing some mercenaries like the imps and others, I'm sure, but this is just who we got. This is the only one on here. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, what you guys would switch around, and let me